Okay, meeting will come to order. You have a record of who's here. Hopefully Greg will come. I need approval of the minutes of 1/19/17. You've got a draft copy.
I'll make the motion.
You make the motion.
Make the motion for the.
Second.
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? Okay. Public comments, public speak. There's not many public here. There's Mr. Check, but he's not public. I wanted to talk to you about something I've asked under new accounts and everything. I've asked her to do from now on, Jamie, this new document what you got. It's the up-to-date budget. Normally we get this in the minutes, but it's a month old when we get it. So this document shows the fund balances that we have right now at the top and the open project balances, and I asked her to put a comment on where we are with each of those open balances, because we were doing a little discussion on that. I'm only giving this out for the record because my concern is to keep track of our money that's out there still. And we're going to have this kind of page every time, and what's more important is the budget will be current. The account balances and open projects are all current to tonight, because she'll put this out with the agenda each time from now on. Instead of putting it in the minutes, and the minutes, again, are a month old. So this tells us we have $803,000 remaining in fiscal year 2017. Any questions on this?
No, I think that's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Even though you didn't have time to read it, but most of the things we did discuss, the open projects. The one big one is the $50,000 we're supposed to get back from the athletic field lights. I'd like to see that happen, but.
Hey, great.
You can
It's
sit
taken,
there.
isn't it?
You can
No,
sit
not
there.
tonight.
Okay?
Have we begun?
We've begun. It's a little past 6:30, sir. So
Sorry
we're
about
just
that.
talking about this new document that you have. Read it over. I pulled it out of the minutes. You should have a copy of it, and it tells you what our current balance is and the current status of any open projects. I wanted that to be current because our minutes are generally a month old when we get the open balances. So this way it'll happen. It's just a new thing. So now we need to talk about the fiscal year budget. This needs to be approved by us this evening, mainly because the mayor needs to put it in the budget so that it's submitted to the full council. Everybody got a copy of this? Fiscal year 2018? I will explain it as best I can. The upper section showing the proposed budget shows the 13% allocation for each of the designated open space, historic preservation, affordable housing. She did 13% because we underestimate the revenue. Hello, sir. You could come and sit down. That'll be in a few minutes. And she underestimates that revenue down below. The CPA budget of $486,000 is based on the first, if you look at the local CPA tax raise, the first allotment we get of 20%. Now, although we are fairly confident that $575,000 figure will be hit, we don't know what the match from the state will end up being, and we don't get that money till late in the fiscal year, the second round of match. So we budget for the first round. This is what she said, and I think it's smart. So the 13% allocation at the top allows us, if we get more money, not to have to redo that, because it has to be 10. In other words, if it's 575, we'll be still above the 10% with 75,000 given to each of those areas. Have I explained that correct?
Do we ever pull out the excess later on?
Come on in. The excess, I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, let's say we're budgeting at 13%, which is more than the 10. If it ends up coming in less, we've over budgeted essentially for what we're putting in our reserves.
I believe, I don't know the law.
Does it stay in the reserves, or?
We can move money as long as we maintain originally putting the 10%. It's the original budget. If we choose to spend it, it's gonna go below. But I don't think we'll need to do that because that money doesn't go away, and if we have any of these things, the first thing we'll use is that allotment. So if we decide to do an open space project, we'll use that 75,000 first.
Oh, I know.
Okay, so, the one thing I wanted to point out is the local CPA tax raise that went up to 405,000. That's purely because we have a Prop 2.5% tax increase every year on property taxes. That's automatic. Doesn't keep up with the cost for the city, but that's the highest we can go. Everybody knows about that. So that's where that revenue comes. You can sit down. Okay. So that's where that comes from. Then there's the match, the 20% match, et cetera. Anybody have any questions? I think it's wise to underestimate the revenue in case of, when we get the money, it's not like it's going to not be used, okay? We have to have at least this much in the bank, and we can count on at least the 486, okay? There's no discussion. I'd like a motion to approve the budget as presented.
Motion to approve the budget as presented.
Second? Okay. Any more discussion? All in
Okay,
favor?
can I just-
Right, discussion?
Just one thing. So what we're looking at down at the bottom where it says total CPA revenue
Mhm.
for fiscal 14, 15, 16, those are actual numbers.
They must be,
And so, for instance, for 16, we had actual revenue of 600,000 about. Our budget was 456,000. So that's how conservative.
That's how she's been
conservative we
conservative.
are. Sometimes it's $100,000 to
As she
$150,000.
She explained it to me. The reason is they don't give us that match until late in the fiscal year, so we don't want to spend it until we get it. We don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah. I'm just illustrating that, just so people understand that, you know, that's how conservative we've been, about $100,000 to $150,000 under what we have been getting, but we can't guarantee that we're gonna receive that money from the state, so.
And the percentage match from the state has gone down over the years.
Yes,
too,
and we're
so-
hoping the new legislation will put the trust fund back in place that we can get a better match. What this does, it guarantees us 486 to spend during the fiscal year. So we understand that. We feel confident we could budget that and spend it, give it to projects, but we can't do the rest until we get it. I think it's well.
And we can't spend over our budget,
No,
right?
we don't have deficit spending unless we're snow.
Well,
We
so
can't
we,
do that.
so we can get, so what happens when we finally get the money from the state that's
It goes into
in
the-
excess of our budget? It just goes
Unlike,
into
the CPA money is always there. It doesn't go back into, like, our budget in the city, the thing is free cash. All the money we don't, all extra revenue, all money not spent by departments goes into,
The undesignated.
it goes into free cash, which is recertified and put back into the budget next year. So each of the departments lose the money, they don't get it. This department maintains it. We save it, so every year that money accumulates, okay? And we'll have more. So this is what comes on top of what we'll have left over, this 486. This is revenue for next year. That 46, if we have left over, if you look at the budget, right now we have 803. If we spend, if we go down to 500,000 there, with the 486, we're back to 986,000 to start the fiscal year. Okay? Any other questions or discussion? We have a motion on the floor. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're on to applicants. City Space. Mr. Check is here.
I'm here again.
Thank you.
This should be very fast. You all received the finished document, which is the East Hampton Community Preservation Act project funding agreement. We changed dates, we did a little wording change, and I wanted to ask Mr. Check if he had any problem with any of that.
No.
Now, I wanted to explain to the committee, I got some information from our finance director. There's also a grant agreement, which you'll see in stuff you got. That's the legal document. This agreement is between the committee and City Space, the one that we're presenting and approving tonight, when we approve the funding. Once the city council does the final approving of the funding, The legal grant agreement has to be signed by City Space with the city finance director. Apparently, there's a new municipal act that went through a couple of years ago, and there's a lot of new rules. And she wants to protect the city for projects that are not city department projects. They're separate, independent projects. This is considered. Those rules might, and don't kill the messenger, might include having to bid the person designing this. Although you may, she thinks that, she doesn't know. She has to talk to the Attorney General more, but because of the new rules, she felt she had to do this, and once it's all done, you need to sit down with her and find out if you have to redo the, who's designing the project. I hope not. I mean, that would be silly, but unfortunately, because it's a city, it's a grant, it's taxpayer money, RFPs, you know, all that stuff has to be done.
And this is Melissa.
Melissa. But again, that document is a legal document, which we didn't have to do for the lobby project because these new rules weren't in place. She also wants to, it's being allocated to a separate, you're gonna manage the grant, et cetera. It's not gonna be managed by the city.
Right.
So this has to be done. I think it has to do with, she said the new municipal act is called the Municipal Efficiency Act. It said it hardly is. It's much more complicated.
Well, so my understanding of this is, once the city council approves our request, then I'm having the meeting with you?
You could have it any time, but once that's approved, then you're gonna sign the agreements.
No, oh, that I understand, I just,
I would have the meeting with her. You can tell her that I mentioned this and you wanted to know, but she has to have more conversations with the Attorney General. I mean, maybe a phone call to find out what would be appropriate, and I don't know when she wants to do it. But that's why there is a second grant agreement. Those of you that have been here when they do approve the lobby project, we didn't have to do that before. But there's new rules and she wants to protect the city, et cetera. And this has to do with projects that aren't under city control, like the school department doing the football field. She won't have to do that because it's a city department. But when it's an outside nonprofit like the city space. So if you, everybody okay with the funding agreement? The budget is as we looked at. Tonight is designated as a quarterly time for funding, so we would be voting this tonight. Then all I need is a motion to approve this phase, $206,479.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay. A motion on the floor to approve the funding of the Old Townhouse second floor renovation restoration design for $206,479 with the designated allocations as presented on the funding, project funding agreement. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries 8-0. The next step, Ed, the next step is city council. It'll be presented to the council.
I know, right?
And once again, you'll have to meet with the finance committee, which I chair, and then the council. I'd say.
you'll let me know those dates, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna say the first meeting in March is when we'll get it. Second meeting in March is when we'll have a public hearing on it.
Okay.
That's when the funding will be done.
Now, am I signing anything tonight?
Yes, you have to sign this right here. I have the document. We've decided to make these agreements between the CPA, if you guys recall, a more of a legal document. Okay, all done.
Just that one?
You're done.
Thank you. We are very excited about this. And we really are working very, very hard. We had a whole, this past week, we hired a strategic planning moderator. And that was incredible. We had the whole agenda that we went through about our mission, the second floor transformation to capital campaign, staffing volunteers, governance. We just talked about everything. And so let's say thank you again.
Mhm.
Excuse me.
By the way, she made it clear to me about that design rebid. There's nothing to say that I don't know, I forget the name of the company that, they're gonna, they certainly could easily get the bid again,
Right.
but you may have to rebid it. I don't know.
I'll talk to her. I mean, we've spent 30,000 already.
Yes, but that, just like this, I don't know. I don't know how it works. I really can't, I don't wanna speak out of
No, it's
turn. I
fine.
don't.
I'll talk to her,
You know.
see what, if I have.
Okay, so that one's done. So, are you people here for the Northampton? Group? All of you?
Yeah.
Then I'm gonna skip to that, instead of doing the Majestic Theater improvements, because they're not here. And we'll, if they show up, we'll do it, otherwise this committee will talk about it. So,
But we're not representing the.
did you wanna speak to her?
We're just here as citizens of East Hampton to hear about that,
Well-
about the courthouse.
The way we left it, just to update
You don't
you.
have to speak, you can also sit and observe, that's fine.
Right, that's why we're here. Yeah, we're
But if
here
anybody wants to
support the
speak in
idea.
favor or opposed to it, that's certainly allowed. But we want it here, okay? But what we want to, I'll update the committee, or remind the committee that we left it with, he was supposed to go to a historic commission meeting and try to talk them into approving it. Unfortunately, the historic commission is having difficulty meeting. So I don't know if they did. This is in, so that the people in the room understand it, the CPA can approve historic, one of the 3 areas that the CPA uses to designate funding is historic preservation. It doesn't designate it that it has to be in East Hampton. Historic preservation of a county courthouse that serves East Hampton is allowed, but the committee would want our local historic commission to have something to say about that. So that's where we left it. The other history of this is when they presented it, Mr. Ford, is that his name?
Yeah.
Mr. Ford presented it. Originally, we told them that we're not really inclined to give any money if Northampton CPA, where the courthouse is located, was not gonna fund it. But they have. Is this Mr. Ford?
It is.
Oh, well, then I'm gonna shut up now. How come you knew? Your ears must be burning. I was updating, we have some people here just wanting to listen in on this, Mr. Ford, and I was updating them to the history, but what I understand it is you couldn't meet with the historic committee, right? We just started discussing this.
I did meet with the historic commission once, maybe about a month and change ago.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Before the last meeting.
Yeah,
Oh, so
before the
what we
last
didn't
meeting.
get out, we
Last
didn't.
CPA.
And what was that, John? What was the outcome of that? Was,
It was a listening session. I don't know that. there
you
was
didn't
an
do
outcome.
any vote or anything? Okay. Well, I'll ask the committee then. Do we as a committee want a recommendation from historic committee, or do we want to act on this alone? I think where they left it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a project where, that's worthy of discussion, but they weren't gonna necessarily commit to yay or nay on it. Am I right on that?
Well, I'd invite Harry to chime in as well. I think that's generally the way I would put it. Everyone agrees that we approve of historic renovations of any significant building or structure.
Okay.
The question of money wasn't on our table, so.
No, it's our table.
We didn't, yeah, so we didn't have any direct discussion about monies. We said, in general, we support renovation of the building, and we're willing to provide support morally and similarly, and Harry, can you think of things that I'm forgetting?
It's already a registered building anyways.
It's a registered historic building, so it's not like it's not a historic building.
But
The fact that
what I
it's,
recall that we were asking the community to sort of, it's historic relevance to East Hampton, I think is kind of where I think Dan had kind of asked about. I don't know if that
Yeah, I think we were looking for like a statement or an endorsement of the project from the Historic Commission.
That was on the agenda for the following meeting, which I was out of the country for, I think you know, and I don't know if that meeting actually happened.
Apparently it didn't, right, Eric? Did not happen.
Well, it seems like we're at this junction then of deciding to act without that meeting have happened, or kicking the can and not acting until that meeting happens.
I guess so. I wasn't prepared to vote funding on this evening myself. I guess I want to hear from the committee. I'm kind of in between. I like the notion of preserving the building. I like the fact that Northampton is supporting it, Northampton CPA. Any other CPA committees come forward since our last meeting?
Hatfield CPC has recommended a $10,000 award for their town meeting coming up. And then I have pending applications in various stages with Hadley, Southampton,
And what's your feeling on what they're thinking?
they've both been, you never really know, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but they've both been good discussions, I think positive. Pretty much all the towns other than Hatfield, I actually didn't even meet with Hatfield. They made the motion without my speeches. But the other two have requested that it go to the Historic Commission for local comment and moving that forward. So I think, certainly in Southampton, that would be very important for the Historic Commission to make a positive vote.
Okay. Committee members, what do you think on this? I think Mr. Ford presented us with funding based on certain population figures, et cetera, but I don't think that restricts us. We can do more or less, we can do whatever we want to make a statement of support.
And
So I'd
just-
like to hear what people think. I don't know. Right now, I could go either way.
And what I would say, representing the Historical Commission, is what we would need is a direct question. Because obviously, there's nobody on that commission who's going to say, oh yeah, we'd rather see the building just fall into disrepair. That won't be the statement. But without a direct question of, with our approval, will this get funded, or something to that effect, I don't know that we would have a consensus in our group about whether we approved of East Hampton committing the funds or not. We're likely to be divided on that. But that's without having had that formal discussion. This is my assessment.
And just, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just by way of reminder, and this is okay with our plans for the restoration, Northampton has made their award contingent on the release of the necessary funds to complete the next phase of
The
the
bonding.
restoration, which is the tower.
All right, so there's contingencies there. Well,
Just-
so in my opinion, committee, there's not a rush on this. I'd like to not fund this till the next cycle, which is 3 months from now. We can get more information, okay? But that gives us time to think about it, and let the historic committee come up with some statement.
Okay.
Yay, nay, or we have no opinion.
Yay or nay on the money?
On whether or not the CPA
No.
committee.
Yeah. I don't think it's
Not
on the money, right?
The money,
I think the money is us, right?
Money is our job.
So what is the yay or nay on? Whether we want to see the building?
And talk about its historical significance and importance to East Hampton. And whether, from the East Hampton Historic Commission's perspective, this structure has, relevance for us as a community. I think that's ultimately, and the Historic Commission's not making the decision on funding. And I think we have to kick that ball around and decide what we want to do, but I think we need to hear from the Historic Commission. If the Historic Commission is opposed to this, or unanimously opposed or whatever, I have a hard time seeing us moving forward with substantial dollars for this project. If it's clear that this is my position is unchanged on this. I think East Hampton should take the lead on this. I think it should be contingent on state funding. I think we should match as a percentage the amount that Northampton has put in for their share, because they've only put in a certain percentage of what is their share. And I would like to see us do something that's a, equivalent percentage of our share. I think other communities are looking for some leadership from the larger communities in Hampshire County to do this. But I do think we need to know from the Historic Commission, is this something that's of historic significance and relevance for East Hampton?
So the question is really about the relevance to East Hampton.
Yeah,
Correct.
and given that, I mean, the other way to potentially do it might be in the form of a resolution or something, like it might not be a yay or nay question, like, it clearly has some
No,
significance.
I mean-
Do you know what I mean, right? So
That's
in
why I
some
want a
way-
statement or endorsement
Right,
or
like,
something
Because
like
I feel
that,
confident saying the commission will suggest that any renovation of a historical building is a worthwhile endeavor.
Right, so that's what I mean. I mean, clearly it's a clearly historic building that's beautiful and we're in Hampshire, like,
It
so
will
the
clearly have
historic
the
commission would
support of
want
the
it to
commission
happen.
in that regard.
But, yeah, so I don't know if there's a way to have some, like, come up with some language as a committee that would make this committee understand kind of the degree to which that feeling is, you know what I mean? Like, is the degree to which that feeling would fall on the, kind of the, like, it's more a nuanced thing than a yay or nay. Like, how much, you get what I'm saying?
I understand that, but go back to the funding a little bit. Historic Commission makes statements on, like, we might be on the Majestic Theater, for instance, whether or not an East Hampton historic building needs to be preserved. So funds for that are in competition with funding this project. So it's got to be in the back of your head. If we say yes to this, they're likely to fund it. Does that compete in your head? I don't know, but I don't think it's completely out of the question that they might think about what the money will do to their future projects. On the other hand, we have to answer to the public, the taxpayers, and remember what we said, does it benefit our public for the future to see that building preserved? I think it does. And from that point of view, and I think the taxpayers need to be convinced of that we're trying to preserve a building that has served East Hampton in the past, and that gives the entire county something to look at. It's a museum piece, et cetera. And if we can point at other communities, putting money in contingent on the bonding, I like that, put that in there, then I think we could answer to our taxpayers better. That's the biggest thing. If the Historic Commission says, we really don't want to do this at all, I don't know how we go forward, but I don't think they would do that. I think it's a historic building and it has some connection to East Hampton. Harry, you chomping to say something? No? Okay.
I think you're gonna find the historic commission is gonna say it's definitely worth preserving. But is it in East Hampton's best
Interest?
interest? Yeah, that's what's gonna happen, from my point of view. Whether I can convince 4 or 5 members of that historic commission to think the way I do, who knows? I don't know.
You
That's
get
the
4
way
or 5 members to be in the same room together, that's a kind of...
That alone is already,
That's
just to get a meeting would be,
Well, I think if you guys can accomplish a meeting like that, or get 4 people in the room, call Mr. Ford and say, drop everything you're doing, we're actually having a meeting, and get them there, seriously. We would like to hear, because I think we have to answer to the public, we, the CPA, and we can't do that over and above your thinking, okay? And you may just say it's a worthy project to be considered, and that's all you say. I don't know, okay.
I kind of like what you said as far as does it serve the citizenry of East Hampton in some way or other. And I think the other side of that coin is if for some reason the courthouse project didn't get the funding that it needed and the structure deteriorated, crumbled, became unusable, does that somehow hurt or not serve the citizenry of East Hampton in some way? And I guess that's the other piece, it's, because that's what we're really talking about here, and if there's something lost to the citizens of East Hampton, if this building fully deteriorates or crumbles or collapses, from the Historic Commission's perspective, does East Hampton have something that we lose as a community from
Well,
that?
That's a good question.
That's a good question, but the other thing to say is history by itself is worth preserving if it gives a sense of community to all of us in the county. I mean, I could argue that point, but
Sure.
it's hard to argue. It may impact us when we talk about it, how much we're giving. I'm looking at the application, 135,000, which I guess was based on some formula, Mr. Ford, you came up with the original thing. We don't have to give that. We can give something to say that we're on board with this. But if we say no, I don't know which one of you said leadership, it may domino into Southampton and other communities saying no. And I don't know if I want to be that committee. I don't know.
One thing that I brought up last time that is the sticking point for me, like I clearly want the building preserved. I think it's in our interest. The sticking point for me is still that it seems like we're in Hampshire County, we're in a unique situation that we're being asked to fund it on a local level, and then we're also asking, we're having the Commonwealth fund it, which is our tax dollars as well. And one thing I brought up last time was kind of understanding more the contrast between that and other historic courthouses in the state, and I didn't know if there was anything new.
Yeah,
on that.
I mean, we are in a completely unique situation with that structure, with that parcel of land, in that it is still owned by the inhabitants of Hampshire County, and it was not transferred directly to the state like all the other courthouses in the Commonwealth. So it is a completely unique situation. I kind of look at it a little, I mean, I understand your point. I kind of look at it, though, a little bit differently in that I do see value in the local population that benefits directly from the courthouse participating in a relatively modest way for the, preservation of the structure that has historically and hopefully in the future benefited the population, as opposed to just an aggregate, large Commonwealth or federal government, doing the maintenance on all of our behalves. I do think there's some merit in participating in a local way, and that's kind of what drove us to look at the CPAs and the other communities in Hampshire County to have that participation, since we are all in fact owners of the structure.
And you say that as the guy who's going to 20 different meetings
Yeah,
in every
beat up
town, right? I
every
mean,
town.
and so I understand what you're saying, but it does feel like, I mean, in a few years, you're gonna be back in front of 20 different towns. Like, is that really the long, sustainable, long term?
Yeah, I think that, the structure has really not been touched in a positive way since 1886. I mean, there was a kind of bastardization of it in the 70s, and people rose up to preserve it in the 50s and the 70s, but there's been no meaningful historic preservation or restoration of the structure since it was constructed. So it's lasted over 100 years to get to its current state. So I think we're, hopefully a good 100 years before the next serious round of restoration work. But, and again, I brought our budget, so there are, processes in place to make sure that going forward, there's more of a, that deferred maintenance does not get deferred so much. So working with Rosenberg and the rest of the delegation, make sure that this is not something that is going to have to reach emergency situation in 100 years from now, that there will be some, looking at it from the state point of view, that making sure that building gets on DCAM's list so that it does not always become a massive deferred maintenance situation.
And just last thing with that, given your role with the courthouse, like in your opinion, you would rather see the courthouse maintain the current ownership, than figure out a different way for long-term funding, whether that's owned by the Commonwealth.
All avenues are being explored, but the avenue that we're talking about tonight is where we're at currently, and anything else would be a much longer-term situation.
I think I asked you this the last time. The release of the bond is not contingent on CPA funding from local communities?
Not officially, but politically, it is certainly.
You think it's there? So is Rosenberg waiting until we make a statement?
No, and I brought some letters. This obviously President Rosenberg and the rest of the delegation, Korkut, Kulik, and the rest are they're not waiting, but they're waiting to the right moment. And so they understand much better than you and I ever will, thank goodness, the workings of DCAM and that state bureaucracy, which is in charge of kind of bringing that release up to the attention of the governor. And so I've kind of letting them manage that political process. And so trusting their judgment that when I can bring 3, 4, 5 towns that are participating, they're gonna know that that's the time to really make a push. But that is to say that all the time from, maybe a year ago to now, they've been working on some foundational aspects of that ask as well.
I don't wanna hold it up, but I think that we're gonna keep it to our funding cycle, which I think is 3 months from now. But I'm ready to say myself that I'm willing, unless the Historic Commission of East Hampton says we don't agree, which I don't think they're gonna say because history is history. I'm personally willing to fund it, not 135,000, I won't go that high, but 50 or something. And I'd like to hear from the committee so we can send him off with a feeling. If you don't wanna make any comment on the record tonight, whether or not you feel comfortable funding this at all, pending 2 things, pending the Historic Commission telling us what they feel, and also contingent on the bond. It's like a catch-22. They're waiting for us, and we're waiting for them, so. How does the committee feel? Do we want to say anything about it now?
I have one quick question. Now, you said this is for this phase. How many total phases are you planning for that?
4.
So is this considered phase 1?
2.
This is
Phase
phase
1
2.
was the restoration of the steps.
So in theory, there's 3 phases left.
Yep.
So if we were to take and look at that 135,000 instead of trying to throw it all at one shot,
Divide it by 3.
divide it by 3, divide it by whatever we want to give. Say it's 75,000 and divide it by 3, we're giving 25,000 at a time, depending on each phase.
What was Northampton's share that they were requesting?
Yeah, so it was 240 total, so they gave 100 the first time, 100 the second time, and they've left 40 on the table for there.
So they're completed their funding cycle.
No,
Almost.
they've left 40 for me to go back.
But it's
next
still,
cycle.
they've fulfilled what you
Their
asked.
second hit.
Their second estimate.
Okay.
Well, given that, we could take the 135 and divide it by 3.
Which would,
That gives us, what is that, 50, 40? 40 something, 45,000.
I personally, I want to record saying I don't have an issue with it. I think it's a worthwhile project.
Anybody else want to comment?
And again, the 135, maybe I would.
It's too
be-
high for this year for me.
Maybe, but breaking up maybe and spread it out may not be that, would be a little bit easier right
And that doesn't commit us to the second and third phase.
now. Right.
But it does say that we're,
Supporting.
because the second and third phase will also have state funding associated with it.
Correct.
Because the CPA funding of 45,000 isn't gonna do much. Harry, what do you think?
The biggest contributor to this whole thing is Amherst, is it not?
On a population basis?
Yeah.
I think that's probably
It was
correct.
340,000, I remember correctly,
Yeah.
335, and how much are they giving?
Nothing.
Right.
We all know
So
what we
because
think
one
about
other
Amherst.
community says no, we're not gonna do it?
It's like $335,000. That's the biggest contributor.
No, the biggest person he's asked, the biggest community he's asked to contribute. There's a lot of other communities that are gonna say no too, Harry.
Harry, I think you're right to be sore about that.
I'm not
But I'm not
sore.
sure, well, I mean, then what's your point?
I think you're upset that they
The
should.
point is, why, if you can't get the biggest city and town to go along with this, then why should the smaller ones follow in suit?
Well,
Why should East Hampton go out there and lead the way in this whole thing when you got the biggest one up in Amherst, doesn't want to give you a dime?
In my opinion,
I don't think East Hampton
Northampton-
is the biggest one, otherwise, I mean, Northampton's already.
Northampton was the
it's
critical
thrown
one. It's in their community. I would never fund this.
I agree.
If Northampton said no. It's right in their downtown.
Northampton said no.
But Northampton
no
is
way.
almost at their full funding, and there's other communities that are saying yes. And to be frank, because Amherst is tight with their money, does not affect my decision-making, I'm sorry, it doesn't.
Get what you're saying, but it's still.
I
can't-
agree that they should be, in a sense, but they may have CPA projects that we don't know about that they want to fund, who knows? Anybody else want to comment on this? I want to give Mr. Ford an idea of where we're headed. And maybe we don't know, Mr. Ford, I don't know if anybody else wants to commit. I'm asking if you feel like we should fund this in some way.
Do you wanna go
I think we
around
should
and
pull
Go
some-
around the table.
Some percentage, yeah, some percentage.
I'm not saying we could commit to dollars, but right now I just want to hear.
Well,
And-
I think my position's pretty clear. I think funding it in part at this point makes makes sense, but I'd like to hear from, get some sort of statement from Historic Commission. And having some contingent situation with the bond fund from the state.
That could be
makes
part of the
sense.
contract.
I guess I do wanna ask Todd, from, the governor ultimately signs off on this, right? So to what degree does the overall state budget situation or state revenue at all play into his calculus of whether he moves forward on releasing the bond money?
The bond allocations are generally quite separate from the budgets.
So if we had, say, an economic downturn in the next 12 to 24 months, do you think that would affect at all the governor or any of this delegation's calculation about supporting the project, releasing the bond money, any of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, who knows how big of an economic downturn, we're talking about, but generally,
Does it benefit them to hold back if we have if
well, no,
there's
because
a
and I say no-ish because there's always gonna be a bond. There's always gonna be capital infrastructure, there's always gonna be deferred maintenance, DCAM always has a list. And where this building fits on that overall list is the critical part. So right now, we're not on the list. But what the delegation is hoping to achieve is to put it on the list. The list is always, there's always gonna be something funded through a bond, and it's just a question of what. And that what is a political process.
And typically, if you're on the list, you stay on the list, it's not like you send.
Well, you're on the list and then you issue a check.
And we don't give any money until they are issued a check. So we're kind of safe in the sense that there's a downturn, I guess.
I just wondered if something did happen, if
Building
for
falls apart.
if for some reason, if I can't foresee what's going to happen in the future or whatever, but would that at all change what happens
Yeah,
at the
if it,
state level?
but for the release of that funds, that building falls apart. That's just the way it is. There's no other.
Well, we want them to
there's no
release
other
the
funding.
funds. There's no doubt we want them to release the
Yeah.
funds. I'm just wondering what other maybe macroeconomic things actually contribute to the decision making about releasing the funds. Okay. You don't really know that.
Scott, Ed, what do you guys think? You feel like the same as Greg? Scott, where are you at? Not committing poll, just the
Yeah, I mean,
that is. You could say I don't know yet.
I mean, I don't, truthfully, I don't know yet. I think what you're saying about the sort of the admin, it being advantageous to have this structure, I think that could be compelling as far as, I think to be able to defend this to a taxpayer saying, in Hampshire County, you're paying this on a local level and you're paying this on a Commonwealth level, where you're not doing that in any other county in the state, still feels, and I want the building preserved. I feel like it should be a Commonwealth obligation. It is in every other place in the state. And so that's what I'm stuck on. And I'm not saying yay or, I'm not voting right now, but that, like, I'm not hesitant at all to put that the building should, that the building is worthwhile of being preserved or, worthwhile of funding. It's the disparity between how this building would be funded. And it's not like the county was, what was it, 97 or 99?
99.
I mean, it's not like this structure's been around for 200 years. It's 18 years, and it seems like, 18 years later, which isn't that long, just seems like it doesn't seem like good government to me to have a building like this where you're gonna have to go to every town to try to get them to get money to then have them release money. Like, it should be funded in a different mechanism.
Yeah, and I am exploring other things along that line, but the timeline of that is not necessarily in sync with the critical need of the building.
Totally, and I get that, and so that's why I'm undecided. You know what I mean? But and in some ways, it's playing chicken, right? Like, I don't want to, But if we just go along with it, then that never happens.
Not
Potential.
necessarily.
Well, not necessarily. You know what I'm saying? That's my
Well,
current taking my temperature.
That's kind of what I'm feeling like. The temperature of the committee is hesitantly optimistic, but hesitant in a sense, because there's some factors involved, the Historic Commission, and we could go out there now and take the temperature of people, see what they think too. This is on the air, we'll find out what happens.
Is there? Anybody here who? Yeah.
Anybody want to speak to this, yea or nay?
I think
Or
it's,
just anything?
I'm in favor of it. I think you need to work it out, but I'm in favor of it because it is a part of the local history. It is a part of the center of New Hampshire County and the Pioneer Valley. And just as far as the taxpayer, I have children who are not of school age. I am paying taxes for the school. It's for the collective good. So
That's a good
though it
statement.
doesn't necessarily affect me, it's for the collective good. And I think you have to think of that in those terms. And Amherst, what the hell?
Oh, yeah, no,
That's my feeling
that
on that
doesn't
too.
bother me.
Are you a resident of East Hampton?
I am.
Okay, that's good to hear. Anybody else?
We're all East Hampton residents.
Okay, I don't know.
Well, I was, as far as taxpayer dollars are concerned, I contribute this to the CPA, which I think is wonderful fund. But also the bond bill, like Todd was talking about, my tax dollars go to that too.
Right.
I would rather see my tax dollars in the bond bill get more money here than going to Eastern Mass or going to somewhere else and funding a different job rather than a job
That's a
here.
good point,
So
too.
yeah, I got taxes going to both places, so let it come here.
Right, if we're gonna compete for the money, let's have it, help us and help this building that has served us all. Like I was telling you, my husband brought up, he's worked next door on First Churches. He brought up a fact I didn't know, that the fountain in front has a stone for every town in Hampshire County engraved in it. And it's my feeling that we should all participate, even if Amherst wants to be Amherst about it. They're not leading by example. We don't need anybody else to dictate what we want to do. It's a worthwhile building. It's the center of our county. I mean, historically, it goes without saying its value. We all need to help each other out. And I love that it's independent of the state. I mean, we got it going on with that. Let's keep this going.
I also think another good point too is I think in your material you'll see that the little town of Goshen contributed their whole amount. I mean, when he talks of, you talk about Amherst not giving anything, well that's a big guy, but what about the little guy too? I mean, they don't have big budgets, they don't have a lot of money, and they saw the value in the building. And I think it's important when you see a little town like Goshen that's saying, yeah, I think it is important, I think it's important enough to get the whole application.
Biggest thing you guys have said that really convinced me is get that bond money here. I like that. I like that argument because we're not even on the list yet. We get on the list, then we have to compete and still get that money to Western Mass, and I like that. Another thing I thought of, going back to what Greg was saying, is that this has, or was it, I think it was Scott, that was talking about how no other communities have done this in Massachusetts. We haven't had a courthouse renovated. So we're setting a precedent here, which might be a good precedent, in the sense that if this goes through and there's CPA money in it and the state bonds it, some other community with an old courthouse might find that useful in how they go for funding. And that's total history, and it's not a bad thing that we're setting a precedent. I don't think it is.
I think it's good leadership.
And you know what? I don't care if it's on the air, but Amherst is not gonna look good if this gets funded, so it's the way it goes. Anyway. I'd like you guys, I know you spoke, if you don't mind putting your name on that piece of paper over there, because we'd like to hear from our residents, okay? That you're here and, that you've spoken tonight. Appreciate it. Anything else, Mr. Ford, you want to say to this?
No.
I'm gonna ask
Appreciate your time.
Harry and John to get you that meeting as soon as they can, so you can speak to it, and whatever statement you want to give us. I mean, we definitely don't want this to happen. Well, I don't know, that would be bad, but don't do that.
I seriously doubt that.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on this topic, guys, that we want to talk about? Thank you all, and thank you. We love to hear you from you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Great discussion, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for coming. So,
Thank you,
Last
everyone.
Good, man.
Ditto. I think I'm down.
You guys got a tough road to hoe.
I have to talk to you about where my head is with the Hampshire, off-the-map Majestic Theater improvements. They haven't been able to meet with the Historic Commission yet, but I've had a lot of
They did
feedback.
meet, but they're waiting for something from the Historic Commission, some kind of.
Did they meet with you
information.
guys? I thought they did. Is there a meeting?
There was a meeting, there was not a lot of people there. So, you were away, and then a couple of people didn't show up, right?
Me and Mike were there, that was it.
Let me say this, guys. I've got a lot of feedback that there's a lot of angst in the community about funding a private for-profit business, that it is a stretch, that it's historical. And that feedback has convinced me that regardless of what the Historic Commission, I would find it very hard to support this.
Even if it's determined that it's historical and it's a historical project, how does it benefit the public?
That's another
The
thing.
biggest point for.
Right. I mean, it's a ceiling, and how much are the public gonna be able to walk in and see the ceiling?
Right.
Great. And to me, there's other buildings in town that might be inhabited by private businesses, that might have been around a long time, that might have historic ties to the history of East Hampton. And I think one of our colleagues said that we are not the CPA Economic Development Committee, and I think that was a good statement, too. I'm sorry, I don't think I could support this regardless of whether the Historic Commission says yes or no to it. And that's just where I am right now. I wanted to discuss with the committee whether we should just reject this or just leave it on the agenda. Wait for the Historic Commission to come up with a yay or nay on it. I'd like to hear from the historic members how they feel. That's where my head
If
is
the
on it.
historical commission comes back and says, yes, it's a historic ceiling and we want to preserve it, I get it. The applicant has to come back and convince me that it benefits
The public.
the public.
And then they have to get the owner to agree, because they don't even own the building.
And I wrote a letter for the commission because I would be absent, the gist of which was that I shared the concern that even though, I think the way I put it is, I think the building and the facade are a wonderful contribution to Cottage Street, but it's not the historic facade. That is not actually, that is a contemporary facade.
And that's not what we're
It's
talking
the
about.
historic one.
We're
Well, I'm
about
just
the
saying, this is
ceiling.
what,
This is context.
this is this context
Context, okay.
of where I'm at on this. So generally speaking, while I wish them the best of success and hope that the building gets as much renovation as humanly possible, I agree. I think that the historical significance is nil. It's not the right argument to say that it's historical significance that justifies the funding. That's it for me.
Even the interior, I mean, have you been any, like, is the,
I didn't get a tour, but when it was the Felt building, they gave me a tour, and what I saw was negligible about what still remained from the historic portion of the building. The tin ceilings are pretty much it, but
that really is like the.
but we have a ton of buildings in town with tin buildings from the exact same era, and I don't know that we want to set the precedent of everybody with a tin ceiling coming to us for preservation funds.
I have a problem with, and I think the taxpayers have a problem with funding private businesses, for-profit businesses. We've done private businesses, but they're nonprofits, where the historic, or the benefit to the community. I think we did Riverside's Windows. I wasn't on the committee then, but I remember voting for that on the council. They're a nonprofit that has a big benefit to the community.
And you can see those from the street.
Well, it's just that it's a big benefit to the public to go to.
I mean,
I don't know. Does the committee want to vote on moving this off of our agenda and sending a letter saying we don't feel comfortable moving forward with this for lots of reasons?
Or do you want to have a discussion with them?
Yeah.
In this forum, have them come back and have them convince me how it benefits the public.
You feel, I'm not open to being convinced, but if you feel, and if any of the members feel like they could be persuaded, then we certainly should have to come back.
The Community Preservation Coalition has a page on their website that says, "Can CPA fund private projects?" Because there is a little bit of precedent with this apparently across the state. And really where they run afoul of this is the anti-aid amendment. And the language in the anti-aid amendment is very negative on funding private projects, whether it's private not-for-profit or private for-profit projects. So I encourage you to look at, I'm not gonna read the whole page, but at the bottom of the page, what they do say, if you don't mind, I'll just read the paragraph. They say, despite the wording of the anti-aid amendment above, which is very strong and harsh and negative, there is a way to make a grant of public money to private organizations. The key concept to understand is that public funds are prohibited from being used for private purposes. Any expenditure of public funds must be used to advance a public purpose. As the Department of Revenue points out in a February 2007 letter to the town of Norfolk, the preservation of historic assets are generally understood to have legitimate public purposes. A variety of federal and state programs provide historic preservation grants to private nonprofit organizations, but typically the public purpose is served by the acquisition of the historic preservation restriction. Likewise, many CPA communities are now requiring historic preservation restrictions as a condition of funding preservation projects on private properties in order to satisfy the anti-aid amendment. I think it's really the only way that we can satisfy the anti-aid
Oh, yeah,
amendment.
absolutely.
So.
We have to decide if it is.
So, right, so ultimately, I mean, I don't think we can even consider this without mandating or requiring that there be some sort of historic preservation restriction.
For the record, can I get you to give me the title of the document again?
So it's, can CPA fund private projects, and it's a page off the Community Preservation Coalition website. So this is our statewide body of CPA.
But the key to that is that there has to be a historic preservation, public benefit, and there has to be a restriction. In this case, I always felt there had to be on the deed to the building, and that the owner would have to agree to that, because if he sold the building, that follows it. And then, therefore, the benefit to the public was what you read. That gets us away from the anti-aid amendment if there's a benefit to the public. But, and historic preservation allows it to be CPA funded. My problem with that is we're opening a big door to private businesses that have some historic architecture that they might want to argue can be funded. There's a lot of tin ceilings in town. If the facade, just to go back to his context, the original Majestic Theater facade was still there and they wanted to renovate it, restore it, now that's something everybody sees. That would sell a little better for me. I don't know. I'm just telling you what I've heard, and a lot of people don't want it to happen, and
Well, this says the bottom line is this: CPA funds may be able to fund a project on private property if the project is advancing a public purpose, such as the public acquiring a deed restriction, providing public access to the property where there was none before, or some other benefit. I don't know whether the owner of the building, not the tenants, but the owner of the building, really wants to have a deed restriction that essentially
Ties
opens
him up
opens
forever,
up
right?
his building to the public. Like, the
Well-
public is just allowed in the building basically as a matter of course, and, you know.
that's a huge point.
It's because selling that property with that deed restriction on it becomes potentially problematic for that owner. That's why I want to hear from the owner on this
Yeah.
project, so.
Absolutely.
I don't think, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. I mean, I feel the same way. I don't think we should just cut this off here before having the owner come in. Like, they want to bring the owner in, they came, you know, they've been really good about coming and saying they want, you know, the owner would come. So I think we should at least give them the opportunity to present again with the owner.
That's why you want to send them a letter and say.
I just don't want to say, yeah, this isn't happening. I mean, not that I disagree with anything you're saying. I just feel like
Well, we should do our
give them the,
we should
yeah,
do
we
our
should do our
due
due diligence
diligence.
and let them have the owner. If the owner could come in and say, this is exactly what I want, and this is, I have no idea. You know, even then, it would probably be a tough sell. But I just feel like it feels bad to me to.
He
they
may
come in
not
and
even
say-
be aware of the restrictions that a deed restriction is gonna put on him if he has to sell the building.
Yeah. So
It's
I
gonna
would,
hurt his sale capability.
still, I would just say, let's table
wait
this
on
till
it.
next time.
And I think because it's on the public record, I would just like to be on the record as saying, this is separate from support for them and their endeavors. I wish
Absolutely.
them the best, I want them to succeed. I just see it as problematic that they're gonna get CPA
Well,
funds.
we
Right.
want economic development, but that's not the CPA's purpose.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and I think that's important to understand. If we open that door, we're gonna have a lot of applicants using this as a precedent, and that's what concerns me. But I agree fully with you, Scott, I think we should let them come. Therefore, is the Historic Commission going to discuss this further?
I wasn't at
Harry,
that
what did
meeting, I
they
don't know
say?
where
Did
things
they- You didn't
left
have
off.
many people at it, right?
It was just me and the chair, that was it.
So that's not really a quorum, so you didn't have any debate. All right, well, I'm gonna
Well,
ask you.
here's the whole problem, okay? The Historic Commission meets after the CPA. So if you were to wait for another month, it'd actually be 2 months, because the Historic Commission meets the last Wednesday of every month, which is after we meet. So even if we put it up next month, we still wouldn't get an answer because the Historic's gonna meet after our next meeting that we're gonna have.
Isn't there one more historic meeting?
So the whole thing is,
You can change a meeting. All the chair has to do is pull
I
everybody.
understand, you talk to the chair.
Who's the
Be my
chair?
guest.
No, who's the chair? I will write him a
Mike
note.
Surowitz.
Huh?
Mike Surowitz.
You have his email.
Yep.
I'm gonna write him a letter and say, we very much desire of you to have a meeting to discuss these two topics, that the CPA really needs your opinion on this, and I'd like you to have a meeting whenever you can get them together. Don't wait for your usual meeting. Have a meeting, because I think it's sad. The commission, and we've got good members on our committee that are on that. We've got good opinions. We like to hear them. I mean, it's
I totally
disturbing.
agree. I've been fighting this for 5 years.
Well, then if you will email me him, I'm gonna write him as a member of as the chair of the CPA committee, saying you need to have this meeting. Please have it. Get the theater, get the Majestic people here and Tom Ford there, okay? It's disturbing, because I think, we're gonna have a committee. We should meet. You guys have been great. I don't think we've had many meetings where we haven't had 9 people. I find that fantastic. It's hard to get 9 people together. Thank you.
It's hard to turn down time in Utah.
It's the vacation package, that's why I think.
Nice, Scott. Appreciate it. All right, well, I think we're adjourned.
Pension, yeah,
Uh,
benefits.
The 401K.
We have Jamie back. Next meeting is March 16th. Anything else we want to talk about? I'm hoping that there will be a meeting before March 16th. I'm going to ask the Historic Commission to get there, because those are the 2 projects that are left for us on the agenda, and we can't act on them unless we hear something, so. All right, so email me that one. Give him a letter. I'm going to write him with council letterhead.
Ooh, look at that.
Seriously, I'm going to say, I'm the city council representative. then I'm the
Can I say
chair.
something here?
Yes, we're on the record.
Now, this
there.
guy's telling me I'm bitter, okay?
He's not bitter.
So I'm gonna bring this back up again, okay?
Can we sell this in the parking lot?
Should we adjourn first?
This guy comes down and gives us a list of all the cities in town that they're gonna possibly owe by population, did he not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the only reason I'm bringing up Amherst, they're supposed to be in the hawk for $335,000. So they come on and told this gentleman, they're not gonna give a dime. Who's gonna make up the other $335,000 that's gonna be put in the pot? Where's that gonna come from?
I think you're misinterpreting what the purpose of this money is. It's to show as much local support as possible. It doesn't reflect, the budget he's presenting to us will take whatever money they can get. If they don't have the $335,000, the project will continue to happen.
All right, I'm missing the whole point. I thought we had to come up to a certain total.
I don't think so. Am I reading that wrong,
No, I don't
guys?
think so.
No,
I
there's
think
no,
we
there's
said we had
no.
a
He's
discussion.
trying to get
He'll
local.
take whatever he can get, he's just looking
If
for
he
the
got
support.
$10,000 from Amherst, he'd be happy.
Okay.
It doesn't affect his
All right,
budget.
well, I misunderstood. I thought we had to come to a certain total.
so I see.
I can see why you would be
35, we
upset,
had
because you would think
135.
that the rest of us would have to come up with more.
Right.
No,
Yeah, yeah,
no,
yeah.
that's not the case.
That's not the case?
No, no,
That's
no.
not my
Well,
understanding.
I thank you for that.
I think they're good now. We could forget the parking lot.
Now you really had a right to be sore.
No, that would be,
Now that you, I mean, you know.
that would be. If we had to come up with the extra money,
You could put
then
an
we wouldn't.
additional burden on East Hampton or Northampton or
Right.
something.
All right, well, that helps, okay?
No, that's not the case. The more communities he can get, the better it looks for the state bonding, I guess.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'm gonna push the button. I need all of your name tags to give to Jamie.
Did you push the button, are we off?
No, we're not. I just pushed the button, but we're not on.